Matthew, are we ready?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. My name is Nancy Bolt. I'm on the board of Jefferson Humanists, and we want to welcome you to this program here in Common Flame Church. Just changed its name. We rent space here. We're not a part of Common Flame. Jefferson Humanist is a chapter of the American Humanist Association. Our motto, our personal motto, is find friends, share ideas, and do good. And this is a special program offered by Jefferson Humanists where we definitely are going to be sharing ideas, and we're looking forward to our speaker today. And we hope that you will find friends and share us after this program for a potluck reception. There's a lot of good food out there that I've been seeing being carried in and will be put out. So I hope that most of you can stay and share, have your supper with us tonight. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Andrew Denison, who's the director of the Transatlantic Networks, a Center for Foreign Policy Consulting and Education in Bonn, Germany. I'm not going to read the rest of it because you can read it for yourself. I had no idea who Dr. Denison was. I got a phone call from a phone call and an email and a phone call and an email and a phone call and an email from Judy Denison, who is our member of our Jefferson Humanists. And she said, my son's coming to town from Germany, and I think you should ask him to speak. And I had no idea who he was, but I thought, well, okay. After a while, I thought, I'll just look him up and see. Well, darn, if he doesn't turn out to be a really important person with a lot of great things to say to us. So we were really pleased that this Sunday was open, and we could have him come in and speak to us. And when we finally decided on the topic, I was really excited because obviously the relationship between the United States and the European Union is of incredible importance in today's society, and you must think so too, because a lot of you showed up. How many of you showed up because you saw Judy Denison's, was on her email? Yeah, quite a few of you, that's kind of what I thought. Well, I'm really pleased that you're here to do this. We're really pleased that he can be here because he makes a lot of presentations in Germany, earning a lot more money than we're able to pay him today. And it's a real pleasure for us to have him. I asked what I might say about what he's going to present, and he said to say that he's going to explain the inexplicable about American politics. And I said, does that mean you're going to explain to us how Donald Trump thinks? And he said, no, not really. So we're really excited to hear his presentation. Dr. Denison. Where are you? Back here.
Nancy. Well, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, my mom. She has a T-shirt that says, nevertheless, she persisted. Nevertheless, she persisted. Thank you for persisting. I'm really glad to be here. I'm glad to see so many people interested in Europe, I presume, and not just in someone that my mom raised, but that's a good reason to be here too. People in Europe, people in Germany are worried that the Americans don't care anymore about Europe. They're also worried that that religion and spirituality and community in America is dominated by the right wing. It's a kind of caricature, but good news is bad news is good news. And then I always have to tell them some stories from this place right here. Okay? This Unitarian church, of course, the No Kings demonstrations. I've seen a couple of people here that pass out and act as ushers, not as ushers. What do you call them, Mom? Marshals. So you're the rest of America, the good America. You know, I grew up in Wyoming, and there's an old bumper sticker from the 70s. I love my country. I fear my government. And there's something to that, okay? Living abroad, people have always said, boy, we love Americans. We just don't like your government, you know? Back in the 70s, it was Vietnam and so forth and so on. So anyway, I'm going to talk to you about the relationship between the United States of America and the less United States of Europe. But I'd like to start by saying I had a good fortune yesterday. Where's my little clicker?
There is a clicker up on the...
There it is. I had the good fortune yesterday, thank you to my mom and to the mayor of Golden, Laura Weinberg, to attend a fundraiser for an incredible gentleman. I'm going to show you a picture. Okay. This is your current Attorney General, a master of lawsuits against the Trump administration, I heard. He's running for governor. That is, first he's running for the Democratic nomination. And I was quite impressed. And I went up to him afterwards and said, oh, I'm in Germany trying to explain the inexplicable, American politics to the Germans. But let me tell you, the demand is infinite. Okay, it's like a siren song. People want to know what's going on in America. Stranger than fiction. It really dominates the headlines like you wouldn't believe. But he said that right off the bat. You can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else, okay? And that is how I start my lectures in Germany and how I've done it for a long time. So when he whispered that in my ear, then I said, okay, this is a man who has a future, in my opinion. All right, so that's that. Now, some of you have been to Europe, right? I know Bob and Nancy in Bulgaria, Germany, the British Isles, France, Iberian Peninsula, Italy, Denmark, Norway, the Baltics, Bulgaria, Romania, okay. But it goes farther than that now, doesn't it? Think about to the east of Poland is Belarus, and then Russia. Or to the east of Ukraine, the Kazakhstans and Kazakhstans, and Europe is open to the east, okay? And not all of those countries are peaceful, harmonious little societies like in Germany and France. Or what about to the south? Africa, more than 1 billion people, huge, just across that tiny Mediterranean. Or the Middle East. Now, the Persians and the Europeans have been at it for a long time, but still, you have to think, Europe is really this exposed little peninsula on a giant Eurasian African continent, quite vulnerable. So, I ask you, in considering the vulnerability of Europe, is the current crisis more due to American idiocy and unpredictability or European weakness? And I picked up a book right out here from the Humanist bookshop. Kurt Anderson, not Vonnegut, Fantasyland, How America Went Haywire, okay? We got a lot of this unpredictability and haywire and stuff, not just from Trump, but it's been going on for a long time. So, that's a problem. But living in Germany and aware of the dangers that the whole continent of Europe faces and the lack of unity on that continent, and even maybe the lazy kind of habit of relying on the Americans to solve the problems, has led to a Europe that has gotten weaker and weaker year by year since the end of the Cold War. So, I, blame the game. You can tell me later what you think. But in asking that question, let's remind ourselves of some things that have stayed the same over the last 80 years since the end of World War II. All right? Peace, freedom, and prosperity like Europe has never seen. I'm a kind of a World War II buff. I'm on the board of the Remagen Bridge Peace Museum. I've accompanied veterans to Germany, US veterans for a long time, and sons of veterans, and that's just part of my thing. And I think that World War II, in some ways, is the measure of all things, and it certainly still shapes the way the world works. I'll talk about that later. But first of all, the message that came out of 80 years of peace and freedom and prosperity in Europe is what a miracle. What a golden age in European history. Who would have thought back then? I had 200-year-old veterans on the bridge towers just last week who fought through Frankfurt and Cologne. Would they have thought back then that Europe looks like it today? When the young boys and girls and the scouts and Remagen talked to them and asked questions, it was like, whoo, who would have thought that? That should give us confidence that Europe and America have developed habits and achieved successes, habits of cooperation that should allow us to tackle the challenges of the future. And the third message out of the commemorations end of World War II was that the challenges have never been bigger, okay? All of the alarm lights on this planet are blinking red. Plenty of reason for Europe and America to work together. When people ask me about American politics, I say, look beyond the president. Bill Clinton and Obama, rapturous ecstasy in Germany, what a great American president, okay? And on the other hand, George Bush and of course Donald Trump is like the end of days, all right? It's a real back and forth. And I say, people, presidents come and go. Interests, what's important to us, like my next Social Security check, or whether I can import goods from abroad for my company. Interests are important, and 340 million Americans, they got a lot of interests that they're willing to defend. And institutions where people come together, reconcile competing interests to pursue common goals. That gives people power. Now that can be government institutions, economic business institutions, church institutions, but it's power. Okay, and the balance of power, can't forget that. So presidents come and go, but presidents say one thing and do another thing, must do another thing. What are some of the interests that shape American foreign policy? I would say that for the last 80 years, we've seen a lot of continuity in the interests and in the nature of the global system as well. World War II really shaped a system that continues to this day. For example, the United States, primus inter pares. We still have about a quarter of the world economy. The demise of the US economy and the dollar has been predicted for at least a half a century. Hasn't happened. We also happen to have cultural dominance. A global nation in an American world, you could say. A global nation in an American world. The siren song of American culture permeates every alley and little village across the planet. So you could also say a global nation in an American world. And it's a tech world. And it's an AI world, and it's a Moore's Law world. And you could argue the Americans are pretty dang good at dealing with technological change. They may not like it, but as Don Parker, some of you may know him, said to me, Americans may not like it, but they do it better than anyone else. So we, in this technological age, still have a lot of cards, to use Trump's term. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. The interests that America pursues in the world are a little bit contradictory. Peace, good government, global prosperity. I'll go into that a little deeper in a second. Next, Eurasia. Since the end of World War II, we have looked at China and Russia as problems. Engage, contain, deter. Ancient empires armed with nuclear weapons. It's a challenge, okay? Secure Europe and Japan. It's in America's vital interest to risk nuclear war to protect Germany and Japan from blackmail, from endangerment, even maybe from endangerment of our investments there. All right, but that is a big commitment. The willingness to risk nuclear war to protect Germany. And finally, we still contend with the legacy, the bleeding wound of decolonization. So these things are the same. Now, other things have changed. I would argue, just to put this in perspective, the biosphere. 80 years ago, there were, less than 3 billion people on the planet. Today, there are 8.5 almost. So population explosion, humans. Biosphere, what about species die-off? Radical, okay? So this stuff we really don't know how to deal with. Atmosphere, same thing. What's going on in our atmosphere in terms of drought and climate change? Maybe China and America will work on it together. First, we got to get China to stop burning coal, but anyway. And the final one is cyber, the cybersphere. This global internet where we're all connected and don't have a clue how it all even works, that's unique. We've had connection before, but never like this. The dollars that flow across the world, that's already crazy. The data that flows across the world, no one has control, whether it's good data or bad data. Now, to go a little bit deeper into these interests, the first one is American interests. When I talk to Germans, I say there's a kind of contradictory set of interests. This is our Declaration of Independence, 250 years. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That governments are to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, securing their right to govern, and so forth and so on, okay? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. American foreign policy, to survive in a crazy world as jungle, anarchy, predatory powers, needs to be about interests, about power, about aircraft carriers, intercontinental ballistic missiles, bases around the world, okay? All that hard power stuff, because it's a dangerous world. But that's not enough. American foreign policy, and sometimes people criticize that, like Henry Kissinger said, well, we're too interested in democracy. But we've always said that the form of government is also a key condition to peace. That if you have limited government used to compromise, they're more peaceful. If you have a tyranny that creates mass graves like Auschwitz, then they're probably not going to be very peaceful. So the kind of government you have counts. And finally, Americans are not only interested in democracy abroad, but we also want markets to flourish. Certainly we would like to earn money abroad and have market share, but there's also the notion that open markets maintain the peace. Think of Bretton Woods. So keeping these various objectives in balance is not easy. There's a certain schizophrenia, certainly a double standard and a good bit of hypocrisy. You know, we've got bloody hands. Think of Dresden or Hiroshima, or even today, maybe the way we blow people out of the water here or there. On the other hand, and we keep coming back to, well, but it's democracy and rule of law, and we got a lot of lawyers saying this is really legitimate. That's part of our foreign policy and making money, whether it's tariffs or opening markets abroad, either way. Keeping those in balance, not easy. But I think if you reflect on the fact that America has competing interests in the world, it makes it easier to understand the kind of zigzag. And it also maybe makes it easier to understand why Americans are relatively flexible in adapting to new challenges. So just to remind you, as I had said before, since the end of World War II, to contain, to deter, and to engage ancient empires armed with nuclear weapons, and to do so with the assistance of the less united states of Europe and the even less united states of the Pacific. That's what we've been doing for a long time. So if people tell you the world is totally different than it was just 20 years ago or 50 years ago, say no. Okay, we still got a China problem just like in Korea. We still got an Asia problem like in Vietnam. At the same time, Russia is also a real problem, and colonization. So that motivates the United States also to remain engaged in Europe, and I'll come to that in a second. But just to kind of give you a picture, this is the kind of world, you know, and here's that little Europe. Only problem with this map is everything south is small, and Europe is actually very teeny compared to Africa. But this open Europe to the east and to the south, that's something that's also been a problem for a long, long time. And Europe's ability to deal with it has never been up to the challenge. With the incredible pressure of migration now, maybe even more of a problem than before. Back to the American interests. And like when you think about Ukraine and the way we've tried to help Ukraine and deter Russia, keep this in mind, okay? We don't want to have a nuclear war with Russia. They have some cards too. And if you ask why isn't Trump doing more for Ukraine, why didn't Biden do more for Ukraine, they were always worried you cross a red line and nuclear escalation is on the horizon, don't want to go there, okay? So, contain, deter Russia, but without nuclear war, all right, without abandoning our allies, and they're economically important, strategically important, and I would argue we have a certain moral commitment to our democratic friends, especially Japan and Europe. And finally, all right, how much are we willing to spend on Ukraine? How much is America willing to spend on defense if the Europeans don't? So there's, again, a dilemma. But if you see American action and sometimes American zigzagging, it's because it's hard to balance all of these objectives. I'm going to skip over this one and argue that in thinking about the challenges today between Europe and America, about the interests at stake, first thing is to keep in mind how Europe and America are growing together. Then I will talk to you about how they're also growing apart in some ways. All right? Growing together every day, closer connections. One way to think about this is the economic connections. The university where I got my PhD, Johns Hopkins SAIS, they put this out yearly with the American Chamber of Commerce, the Transatlantic economy. And what they say, and this has just come out like in April, despite the turbulence, goods trade flows held strong, services trades quietly continued to grow, and Europe and the United States remained each other's most important sources of foreign affiliate income. Transatlantic commerce continues to thrive, and this dense web of deep connections remains a strength, not a burden, in a more competitive and disruptive age. In the last year, despite Trump and all the concerns in Europe about kowtowing to Trump, the economic integration grew by $500 billion. And just to put these numbers in perspective, whoopsie, if you look at these bars, you see a number here, 7.4 trillion. The Atlantic marketplace foreign affiliate income, DHL in this country, Germany's company with the largest number of workers in the United States, 400,000. T-Mobile, also headquartered in Bonn, right next to DHL, a big company. They don't make money by shipping containers over. They make money by selling services. And that's a huge amount. And that's a huge amount compared to foreign affiliate income across the whole Asia-Pacific, Korea, Japan, China, everything. Look, it's 4.2 trillion instead of 7.4 trillion. The executive boards, the company leadership across the Atlantic, much more densely integrated. Financial services, all of that stuff. Trade is a little higher across the Pacific because Asia remains a factory for the United States. So container ships. Trade across the Atlantic has gone down for a long time, but with the end of Russian energy and the boom of American energy, American gas, oil, and coal are going to Europe in record quantities. And that has lifted this trade up. Now, there's still a trade imbalance, and Trump gripes about it, but the tariffs he threatens are in the $100 to $500 billion range at the max. And the whole economy is 9.6 trillion. So you got to keep it in perspective. The ties that bind. It's hard for America to turn its back on that source of wealth, even if Trump is perhaps legitimately complaining about the Europeans being free riders. Ties that bind, interests remain. Here's another one, just as a side. Transatlantic air travel, okay? Back in 2000, we were at 50 million. Up here, we hit 72 before COVID, whoa, way down. And then, just in the last year, it's gone up by another 2 million to 77 million. We're above what we've ever been before. All right, so yes, we're upset. Maybe intimacy breeds contempt, but we still want to travel back and forth, whether to make money or to have fun. So that ties us together. Many other things too, cultural affinity, social networks. Hard to just make a divorce. What are some of the problems? All right, why are there issues that we need to deal with? I mean, there's always been a fight between America and Europe about who pays for defense. And we always said, well, if you don't pay enough, we're going to leave. And the Europeans said, bullshit. You're not going to leave because you have a vital interest in peace and freedom and prosperity in Europe. Probably a more vital interest in European unity than the selfish, egotistical, short-sighted nations of Europe who don't always want to unify, okay? So Europeans want influence, even a veto in Washington, for example, how we deal with Ukraine or Iran. And the Americans want the Europeans to do more. But at the end of the day, we find some sort of quid pro quo. The other challenge has always been Europe or the world. Every time America looks to Asia, then the Europeans go crazy, which maybe is not bad. It makes them interested in Asia. But you know what? It's not that America is shifting to Asia. We've always been there. Europe is shifting radically to Asia. You know, they talk about the Chinese threat now. The German Economic Council talks about it. NATO talks about China as a threat. That used to be taboo. So I think you could argue that here, too, even though in some ways we're growing apart in that, you know, Europe is saying, Europe, Russia, Ukraine, why are you guys worried about China and Iran? Still, it's a small planet, getting smaller every day, and the Europeans have a stake in many of the same places outside of Europe that we do. Finally, always a fight between, do you talk to the Russians and talk to them some more until they agree to a ceasefire, or do you have to use pressure and force? And the European model, the EU and the Euro, that's a lot about cooperation and compromise. But you can't forget the other side of the coin, which is like Normandy and NATO and nuclear deterrence and military power. Both works well. But sometimes Europe thinking, we just do the diplomacy and the Americans do the defense, that's not very good. All right? Growing apart, also another, and I think very concerning thing. It's maybe hard to read, but I had mentioned before that the United States' share of the global GDP since way back here in 1980 has been between 25 and 30%, okay? The European share, the blue share, used to be the same as the US just 20 years ago, and it's gone down, 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 so that it is now 17.3%. And who's come up? China, at the expense of the United States or of Europe? At the expense of Europe. So Europe, with a weak economy, has trouble spending on defense, means easy to be get kicked around by Donald Trump. So that is a real challenge. Europe has a demographic problem. Germany loses about 200,000 workers every year. So do you bring in immigrants, skilled workers plus their families? I mean, Pan America is one thing, but Euro-Arabia, that's a whole lot more difficult, if I may say. It's just more difficult. So where do they come from? Lots of other reasons. Europe is just not into the tech giant progress like Americans are. Maybe it's wise. Maybe at the end of the day, Elon Musk will rule the world, and we'll all be rather disappointed with that. But I think you could argue the Europeans aren't keeping up technologically. So here's the challenge. How do you help a weak Europe become stronger? One of the things that has changed and is most important to that is Germany. Germany has a new role. Germany during the Cold War was like France and Britain. They're all the same size, they're all deep into NATO. Now Germany is almost a third bigger than France and Britain. The biggest. And yet its military is weak. And people say, writing in Foreign Affairs, for example, a German military dominance, which would seem to be self-evident because of its economic power, German military dominance in Europe would fragment Europe and would destabilize Europe. We have to wait till Europe unites. And I think that's like waiting forever. But it's hard. I hope America can encourage the Europeans to accept that Germany plays a larger role. Because if Germany doesn't, all the other European countries hide behind Germany. Here is our Germany. And in some ways, if you think of NATO reaching from Norway all the way to Turkey, this is kind of like the keystone. If there's a big hole here, and they can't defend themselves, even if the Baltics and these guys and Poland are really strong, that's a provocation for Putin. Weakness is a provocation. And here you see Germany's defense spending. All along, they have spent, as a percentage of GDP compared to the United States, significantly less. Now, in the 1960s, we were in Vietnam. We didn't leave Europe. We just filled Europe up with nuclear weapons. We went from 1,000 to 5,000 nuclear weapons. But yet, even here, the Germans, despite the worry that America was committed in Vietnam, they didn't really increase their defense spending that much. And now, just a little bit after Donald Trump came, Putin did a bit, but it wasn't until Trump came that the Germans really increased their defense spending, because they know he cares about cards. If we want cards in the White House, we can't just be talking nice and complimenting his gold art or his gold decoration. We've got to put something on the table. And the German Chancellor, Merz, has said Germany should have the strongest conventional army in Europe. He's also committed to spending 3.5% of the GDP on defense. They won't be spending that until after Trump leaves. So it's not that urgent, but he still wants to be the strongest. And the reason he's saying that, too, is because everyone in Europe is saying, oh, my gosh, we can't trust the Americans anymore, so we got to be stronger. And there's something to that. But if you put too much emphasis on we can't trust the Americans anymore, you create your own problems. And one of the problems you create is if you can't trust the Americans, Are you going to trust them to risk nuclear war to protect you? And that's a pretty tricky thing. It's a problem today. It's a problem that moved me in the early 80s when I met my wife first at the Peace Movement up in Wyoming to protest against the MX missile. I thought that's crazy that we're defending the Germans. They should defend themselves. And now, 40 years later, we're still seeing that this nuclear commitment to Germany is a real problem. Because if the Germans don't trust the Americans, then Putin will think, oh, maybe I got an angle here. I can divide them. Many nuclear weapons still exist on this planet. Germany wants to be the strongest conventional power in Europe, but doesn't want to get near nuclear weapons. That's a challenge. Germany with nuclear weapons? Okay, it would solve some problems, create others. I don't think that question is going to go away. But again, I want to underline that sometimes inconsistent, contradictory kind of thinking in Germany about America's commitment to Europe. Okay, you listen to Trump, you think he hates Europe, so you write as a German editorialist in the New York Times, maybe Trump has already left NATO. The more useful question is whether Trump could undermine NATO to the point that he has effectively withdrawn the United States, to which the answer is maybe he already has. Is anyone confident America is coming? Is anyone confident America is coming? That's her question. 3 paragraphs later, though, she says, nuclear deterrence currently relies primarily on U.S. weapons, and there's no indication that the United States intends to limit its nuclear guarantee. So once again, a challenge to the transatlantic relationship is that everyone is like crying that the sky is falling and that America is no longer there. But then they turn around and say, of course we can rely on the Americans for nuclear deterrence, and we certainly don't want to think about having a nuclear option ourselves. That would be political, it's suicide. Again, it's a challenge. Just to remind you, it's not just a conventional thing, Germany being the strongest army, the whole nuclear relationship remains very complicated and very much a function of trust. I believe trust doesn't just come from what people say, but from the interests and institutions that lie behind the engagement. We can trust the Europeans usually to act in their interest, even if they sometimes say things differently. I believe the Europeans can also trust the Americans to act in their interest, even if Trump says, I'm pulling all our troops out or whatever. Okay, so where does trust come from? Partially what you say, but also really what the stakes are at play. Ukraine. I'm coming to the end. I'll just hit a couple issues now, and then we'll be done. So first of all, since that February day in 2022, when this war started, there's been a shadow hanging over Europe, otherwise a peaceful, prosperous, happy place. A shadow. It is an abomination that this killing continues more than 4 years afterwards. And how long? Who wins? What are the terms of peace? We really don't know. I mean, yeah, Trump tried more than Biden did in some ways. He certainly talked to Putin more. But Putin, you have to ask whether he could survive a ceasefire, much less a peace in Ukraine. Could Putin survive that? Many people think no. So he's like all in. What does it take to get him to stop? Pressure? Probably. How much pressure? Who knows? Want to risk nuclear war? Rather not. Want to spend a fortune on air defense for every cheap Russian drone, expensive anti-defense? Probably not. Where do we go from here? It seems to me that if Russia is going to face the pressure necessary to stand down, that dangerous degree of pressure will not come from the United States with long-range rockets or from Germany with long-range rockets. It will come from Ukraine with their long-range rockets that Germany now wants to buy for itself so it can reach Moscow too. Because the technology there and the production capabilities and the way the Ukrainians have scaled up their high-tech military is amazing. And they have defeated American units in the field. 2 battalions, you may have seen this in Baltic exercises, a small Ukrainian drone group. In 24 hours, they were gone, 2 U.S. battalions. So these guys, all of a sudden, are not dependent on the rest of Europe. They're helping the rest of Europe. And while we're at it, in the Persian Gulf, they're helping too. And when Ukraine has the military capacity itself, it's the country with everything on the line, to push back hard so that Putin knows there's no future, and more importantly, all those around him know there's no future going with Putin. That's when I think the peace will come. It won't be easy, but to think that the Americans and the Europeans are going to risk what is necessary to get Putin to stand down, I don't believe it. But I'm confident that the Ukrainians, with their incredible capacity, 80 million Ukrainians, they are going to be able to do it, with European help and American help. So that much for Ukraine. Middle East, horrible problem. It's a real tragedy that we've made ourselves so dependent on the cheap oil and gas and fertilizer coming out of the Strait of Hormuz, because we just asked for being blackmailed by a rather nefarious regime. Now, how do you deal with them? I don't know who's got a better idea, but certainly the Europeans are rather frustrated that Trump didn't ask him whether he would be allowed to do that or not. And remind you, Europe always likes to have some influence, if not a veto, over what White House does. Wasn't happening. Nevertheless, at the end of the day, I'm sure that Europe will be part of securing the Strait of Hormuz with European ships. China, I had mentioned, Europe is much more engaged in China than it used to be. I think the challenge with China is a weak China, not a strong China. A China that falls apart under its contradictions of Maoism, Marxism, market capitalism, but still dangerous. Not a huge problem. Migration is a big, big problem, because migration kills support for democracy and Europe. All right? Enough problems with Europe already, not trusting Europe. And how to quell that? Well, part of it is creating stability in the Middle East and Africa. That's a problem that America and Europe can do together a lot better than separately. Energy and the environment, total recalculation of Europe's commitments to emission reduction because of AI and because of the Russians and the Chinese. So what an opportunity for the United States and Europe to recalculate what is necessary to get energy security, because if the Chinese are the only ones with incredible energy, they are also the only ones with incredible computer power, and that means they will set the agenda for the future. So energy security, energy cost, cheap, otherwise people rise up and populists come in, and energy diversity. And there I'm confident. Diversity, the markets are pretty darn flexible. The crises that were predicted with the Strait of Hormuz haven't come. The crises that were predicted when Russian gas no longer served Europe haven't come. So we can hope that that flexibility, that diversity, will be part of the solution. Finally, with artificial intelligence, everyone knows it's something that nations who otherwise don't trust each other have to cooperate on. Otherwise, it might get away from us. But no one knows how to create that cooperation. Because cooperation is really coordination, and then it's really who's coordinating whom, who's setting the terms of engagement, and it becomes then a problem of the pecking order. So again, kind of a tragedy of the commons, if you will. The commitment and the trust to really do something about this radical technology is not yet there. But the need to do something about it grows by the day. And I, as an optimist, think that demand to do something will drive Europe and America together, despite their differences, to try to get a handle on this incredible revolution in technology. So we are nearing the end. Let us ask, what kind of future lies in store for this relationship? I have talked about the Pax Atlantica, the success of the last 80 years, a united States and a maybe less united Europe, but still more united than ever before, expands the peace and the freedom and the prosperity. After '89, we saw that. You see Europe engaging around the broader European periphery more and more, and at some point, Europe ends in China, okay? But Pax America is also possible when the Europeans can't unite, because every time you commit to Europe, the populists get strong, and then you have to back away from Europe. Then America goes in and picks the raisins out of the cake and finds England or a Spain or a Poland to work with us, but we set the agenda because the Europeans aren't speaking in one voice. I don't think that's really good. It's better if the Europeans have a little self-confidence, because when they think America's setting an agenda, pretty soon they start saying America's responsible for all the problems in the world, and whatever America does will make it worse. So better to have a little empowerment of the Europeans so they feel more confident and not always cynical and fatalistic. Pax China? I don't know, some people look at Africa or think of the Silk Road and see China as the future. I don't know. I think the siren song of American culture, even if our government is crazy, is never gonna, the Chinese are never gonna be able to pass that. So we have narrative dominance. Multipolar, more likely. Europe does unite, but doesn't want to have anything to do with the crazy Americans who somehow are lost in Greenland or something like that. And Russia and China, it's like the old world. Russia and China always say we have a multipolar world, right? China doesn't say Pax China, they say multipolar. But France has also said multipolar. Germany has also said multipolar. Every time you don't want Pax Atlantica, Pax America, you want the Americans to have less influence, you start talking about multipolar world order. Think of Mr. Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister speaking at Davos, same thing, okay? Ditch America, we'll do it on ourselves. Oh, I left that one in German. Isolationismus und Abschottung. Isolationism and Abschottung is setting yourself off from everyone else, closing your borders. That could be like the ancient Middle Ages where small countries fighting against everyone. That would be a horrible world for the Americans and an even worse one for Europe. So I hope, to finish, that the Pax Atlantica expands, NATO, EU, all these ideas, and slowly but surely more and more of the world's countries kind of come under this umbrella. It's optimistic, maybe even a little arrogant, but I don't see many other alternatives. So, damn to success. The European-American relationship, more important than ever before. We should have confidence, considering how far we've come, and remembering what a miracle it is that Europe 80 years after World War II looks like it does today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We have time for some questions. Who would like to ask a question? Oh, we have lots of them. All right. I saw your hand first, so I'll come over here. Please speak into the microphone so that not only the people in the room, but the people who might be viewing this streaming can hear.
Thank you, Andrew. You made a point that migration from Africa is threatening democracy. Is that solvable given climate change, or will it persist regardless of what the world wants to do to help Africa be more self-sufficient?
Yes. First of all, one also needs to be reminded that it's not just migration, but uncontrolled migration. And Europe nobly removed all of its internal borders with Schengen, so you can go from France to Germany, woo, from Germany to Poland, no problem. Well, guess what? No external borders. And I mean, if a government has one role, it's to secure the external borders. And yet they don't. So Greece and Italy and Spain, they get the burden. And then they go into Europe. And because they can't get jobs, they're on the black market. Here, at least you give them jobs. Okay, most of them, or at least they can work because we somehow tolerate it. That doesn't happen. So they're there on the street corners, and it makes a bad image. And then the populists have a enemy image, a scapegoat for all the problems. That being said, even if Europe were able to secure its borders the way the United States does, and we have lots of visitors, but we have pretty high tech, climate change means that the indexes of misery, they're all going down except for displaced persons internally and externally. Those numbers are almost doubling. And how do you deal with that? You certainly move towards mitigating the consequences in the South, which has been the agenda of the UN climate conferences now for some time. And otherwise, you turn to radical solutions to stop climate change in its tracks, and we're not there yet. Maybe that's the thing, AI is going to have to find a way for clean, infinite energy, or else there will be no future of AI. I mean, not putting it in their hands, but we don't have an answer right now for the migration climate change problem.
Where is migration coming?
No, you have to use the microphone, or people can. Hold on just a minute. There are some questions over here. Who had a question over here?
This should be simple. It's just an easy. I'm always asking why. But back when you mentioned that Germany won't really escalate its military power and control military power until Trump leaves office, I just wondered why.
Okay. Because it's not that urgent, even though they say Donald Trump is turning his back on America, leaving NATO, and is even against Europe. And that is said, and yet if that were really the case, you would do what Ukraine did when there was an existential threat, and you would rearm like, and at other times Germany did that. Even in the late 70s, when the Cold War came with Reagan and Afghanistan, or in the Berlin crisis time. But this time somehow, we don't like the Americans, but we don't like spending on defense either, and we don't really need to. That's how I see it. There may be another explanation. Yeah.
You feel like if you feel like you need it, you should start now.
Start now, yeah.
Okay, Mark?
No.
I guess you may.
Okay.
You never talked about. Oh, you did. You never said the word Israel today, and to me, it seems to color a lot of what's going on in the world. And I'd like you to comment on your thoughts. Is it just a footnote, or is it really central to some of what's happening today?
The question of Israel. You mentioned the Middle East and Iran, but Israel as such, in transatlantic relations, since the beginning when Israel was recognized and all that followed in terms of the Arabs declaring war on this new state, Germany has had to tread a very careful path and has very happily let the Americans lead. Or the French, until the '67 war, were also very involved. If you think of the Israelis, the Brits, and the French in '56 with the Suez crisis, okay? But Germany was always out back. And the other Europeans, sometimes they were friendly with Israel, and sometimes they weren't. Now, too, I think, Germany is very conflicted since the attack of Hamas on Gaza, on sympathizing with the Israelis, but being horrified of what could happen to the Palestinians, and feeling a calling, a moral responsibility to support the underdog. At the same time, not wanting to abandon the Israelis, certainly the Jews, but even Israel, to live in secure borders. Okay? So, how do you play that? Carefully. Say as little as possible. We support the right of Israel to self-defense. We are concerned about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Not bad Israel, good. Okay? So, there. Deferring to the United States on the ceasefire agreement, again, encouraging, helping, offering to pay money, but then being critical. Because who are these people on the board of peace? They're all of these non-democracies from the Arab world. Are they just there to pay money? What's happening here? And of course, every time Trump talks about turning Gaza into Mar-a-Lago, then they go crazy. But at the end of the day, the Germans know how much the crisis in the Middle East is a function of Israel, but they don't know how to make it better. I mean, that's kind of a cop-out answer maybe, but it, it's just a hot potato. So, and maybe a couple of things too. The EU, okay, the EU is going to be real involved. We're going to give the Palestinian Authority lots of money, and Germany's all in favor of that because the EU is doing it, so it's not really on our watch. And then it turns out all that EU money was used to build tunnels. Yeah, so that's a problem. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
You mentioned that America and Europe are ultimately bound by common interests, but how are they supposed to deal with someone who appears to keep acting against what appears to be their own self-interest? especially if that eventually will lead to democratic backsliding, which would make what's considered their best interests very soon different from what people will conventionally consider common interests.
Well, I mean, we could say that it's good that the Hungarians decided that they would elect someone new, but I think you're talking about how the Germans and the Europeans should deal with Donald Trump and his political style of provocation, of throwing firecrackers into the crowd and watching people rip their hair out. And what I don't think the Germans and the Europeans should do is compete with one another to see who can read a longer litany of complaint and indictment against Donald Trump with the, what do they call the éclat de jour, the provocation of the day, because that just gives him more power. Instead, you really have to differentiate between what he says and what he can do. Reality has a vote, and the balance of power has a vote. So, not concentrate just on Donald Trump, but on the incredibly dense network of common connections, common interests across the Atlantic to work around Donald Trump.
The issue is you can only really assume that so long as America's institutions remain strong to keep him in check, that's very rapidly falling apart. And when that happens, his interests become America's interests.
Well, in other countries that would certainly be the case. It remains to be seen here. But there are people who would argue that Trump is weaker today than he was a year ago and not stronger. All right? The jury is still out. But we have to be careful and not be despondent, okay? The challenges are huge, but nothing is predetermined. We have a vote in this. And I would argue, being the son of a physicist, for every action there's a reaction, and that certainly pertains to Trump.
Yeah.
My brother's family lives in Sweden, and my 21-year-old nephew knows more about our politics than most Americans do. And I was expressing my concern to them about Russia. They're in Sweden. And their response was they'd have to go through Finland first. And whenever they do that, they get their head handed to them. So we're not worried.
Cool. I mean, yeah, that's the moral hazard problem, okay? That's the moral hazard problem. But Finland and Sweden did join NATO, and that was a radical change, and that was really fundamental. And again, that was a function of interests and institutions and the balance of power. Finland, I was in Helsinki with some German officers 2 years ago. That city of 800,000 has 1.2 million beds in bomb shelters that can survive nuclear attack. Big. I mean, the bomb shelters are like gyms and restaurants underground and parking lots, but then they open the secret door and you see all the air filters. So I think, yes, the Swedes are maybe that way, but they're pretty tough, and they have some great weapons that they're selling to the Ukrainians now, too. So don't write the Swedes off. I mean, the Germans look to the Swedes for the naval power they have in the Baltic, fighting the Russians.
Other questions?
I've heard a couple of experts talk recently about two comments about the European community. One is that countries like France and Germany have a disproportionate role in the financing of the European community, and also that there are some countries who are contemplating some form of Brexit, and that it's a kind of a fragile union at the moment. I mean, do you see that phenomenon as what will it be its impact on the Pax Atlantica?
Unity and diversity is very difficult for the Europeans, and the less unified they are, the weaker is Pax Atlantica, the more likely is Pax America. That's right, individual nations not cooperating. How do you get the Europeans to pool their sovereignty? My solution is you got to stop waiting for Europe. You can't say, where was Europe during the Afghanistan evacuation. Where is Europe in the Strait of Hormuz? There is no Europe. There's less of a Europe than there is in NATO, and that's made up of nation states. So waiting for Europe no longer easy for Germans to say, oh, we got to wait for Europe because Germany's the biggest and they'd have to do the most and take the most risk as a leader. So wait for Europe. But the problem is Europe has become its own enemy in so many different fields. Maybe because Europe has the European Union, this institution, what is it, 27 now or something like that, they have no taxing power. They spend minuscule 1.2% of the European GDP on their projects, and the German government is 48% of its GDP on local, state, and federal taxes. So the EU has no financing power, but it certainly has regulatory power. And everyone comes along with their favorite little regulation, and then it becomes the pecking order, who gets their regulation through, and if you get yours, I get mine. And it's like this overload of regulations. So everyone starts to hate Europe, and understandably. So for me, it really is time, like big companies that know how to work together, that the European nations have to see themselves as big companies that can work together, and not as some sort of little, I don't know, under part of the EU that really doesn't exist, I don't know. So strong nations, strong Germany will lead to a strong Europe. Praying for Europe and doing nothing about your national power is a recipe for disaster.
Oh boy, I have a lot of questions. But, I watch a lot of MS Now, and there's, the people who know the State Department's been dismantled, the U.S. State Department. But three questions. One is this MS Now reference. I've heard, not pundits, experts talk about a three-part world: the Western Hemisphere, the European Hemisphere with Putin, and then the Chinese Hemisphere, so to speak, with Asia. I mean, do you have a sentiment about that? There's a lot of talk about that. That's what Trump wants to create. That's what Putin wants to create. That's what Xi Jinping wants to create. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Well, Xi Jinping and Putin, maybe. I don't think Trump. I think Trump wants to rule the world.
Well,
and I think that's pretty American. This Pax Atlantica or Pax Americana, it really is American dominance. And there's lots of discussion about this multipolar world, but America, or the Europeans say, oh, America's focusing on Latin America. They must be withdrawing from the rest of the world. That's wrong. We focus on Latin America so that our backyard, if I may, is safe, so we're much more capable of engaging in Japan or in Kazakhstan or wherever. So that's always been, think of Cuba, think of Nicaragua. I mean, we've always had to protect our backyard to be a global power. So don't think protecting the backyard means we're just going to be a hemispheric power. I don't see that. And again, I talk about American economic interests around the world. We're simply too interdependent. And if we're that interdependent, then we want to be able to call the shots. Okay, that may not be fair, and maybe we're better at compromise than Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin, but still, we want a world that's favorable to our interests. What else would you expect? Now, sometimes a world favorable to our interests involves some compromise and cooperation with others, and pretty good at that, actually. But it doesn't mean we're perfect. And others are always going to be frustrated, and they're going to be complaining and accusing us of betrayal, of turning our back on their interests. Common complaint, even during World War II. Churchill said, God, there's nothing worse than having allies. So, yeah. So I don't think there's going to be a multiple. I think it's going to be a global nation, an American world, and the rest of the world is going to be either joining us or trying to balance against us, which is very difficult.
Is the European press doing any kind of discussion of the spinelessness of the United States Congress?
Good. That one came from the ether, right? Yes. The spinelessness of the United States Congress. Yeah, though they would note, and I would remind them, that in the last Defense Authorization Act, the Republican majorities in both houses did say that Trump could not reduce the U.S. troops below 70,000 in Europe, below 70,000 without permission from Congress. They're at about 80,000 now. And I mean, even if there are half that many there, they're still the most powerful military force in Europe, far better than the Bundeswehr. But in that, excuse me, I lost my train of thought now. Could you repeat the question?
The spinelessness of the American
there you
Congress.
go. Thank you. Okay. So the Congress did that. But many people say the institutions of the Constitution have been hollowed out because Congress is not saying no to Trump. The thing is that you got Republican majorities in Congress, and Republican majorities don't that often say no to their boss. Sometimes they do, but not often. Now, if you had Democratic majorities in Congress and they were still not voting against Trump because they all thought they'd be arrested, then you could say that the Congress was spineless or intimidated at least. But right now, I think you have to recognize the Republicans see it in their political interest to continue to support them. And it's not a constitutional crisis, it's maybe a political crisis. At some point, Trump will be a lame duck, and those wanting to be reelected are going to start recalculating the benefit of their loyalty to Donald Trump. That's what one assumes anyway.
I was in Zimbabwe and Zambia, and all of the mines are owned by the Chinese. Mm-hmm. It is all about China. So now what?
Well, as long as they stay in Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe is a rough place. But in general, the Chinese, in their ambitions, called often the Silk Road, to go out there and invest in all these minerals and this, that, and the other thing, and buy up all the land. First of all, misallocation of resources. If those had been profitable projects, Western capital would have been there long ago. Okay? Secondly, political influence goes both ways, and the Chinese are much quicker at wearing out their welcome than the Americans are, because we're still into diversity, believe it or not, when we go to Zimbabwe or whatever. And so I'm not too concerned about the Chinese. I'm a little more concerned maybe that we haven't done more to become a little more independent of China still, because in the short term it's a problem, but more the rare earths and the critical minerals that they have in their own country versus their control over, like, Venezuelan oil.
You want to finish your question?
It just always strikes me about who are the leaders in the world, and it's a very idealistic question about, Putin's got to be delusional. The guy's got to be a nut job. And so it's always about individual leaders. And boy, wouldn't it be nice if this country had a visionary leader regarding international relations, European and international. Mm-hmm. I know that's idealism.
Well, there are 2 points. One is it's not just Putin, it's a system. The system perpetuates this kind of gangster rule, okay? And those are institutions and interests that remain. You can't turn them off overnight. As far as a leader that could unite the United States more than our past presidents, I don't know. You could say America is always on the verge of civil war until the foreign threat seems more dangerous than the other party. There's a lot of contention in this country, no doubt. And as powerful a visionary is for some people, he's going to be turning other people off. So probably you're never going to have the great unifier, and that maybe there's a virtue in that necessity because it keeps us flexible on our toes, always in argument.
All right, let's give another round of applause to Dr. Denison.
Thank you very much.
So just 2 final quick announcements. One, please stay for all the wonderful food that we have out there. Share dinner, you can stay? Yeah. Yes, good. So he didn't come to speak, just came for the dinner.
Food for thought.
So if you have more questions, you want to talk to him more about his presentation, please you'll have a chance to do that at dinner. And second, we always have a program and a speaker on the 4th Sunday of every month. Next, in June, our speaker has to do with the election process in Colorado. We will have the head of elections in Colorado. We'll talk to you about, is your vote safe in Colorado? So we certainly hope you'll come back then, 4 o'clock, and we'll also have another potluck dinner afterwards. So please join us on the fourth Sunday of June to hear about your vote and whether it will be counted and how it will be counted. All right, thank you very much for coming today.